Hi friends, thank you so much for connecting with me today. Appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your day today. So we are continuing our series in what Paul has to say about the armor of God. And today we're talking about the importance of good footwear. So 4 years ago, in the fall of 2021, Kathy and I went on a grand adventure. We did the southern half of the Tour de Mont Blanc. Have you ever heard of it? It's a 100-mile hike around Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is the highest mountain in Western Europe. And France, Italy, and Switzerland all border Mont Blanc. And so we did the southern half of this 100-mile hike. And, when we were preparing for it, we got our hiking poles and we put on our shoes and sometimes our backpacks. And we went up to Eldred King Woodland and, we walked, we're training, right? We were walking, through the nicely manicured pathways of Eldred King. But nothing could have prepared us for the treacherous conditions, for the hiking through the mountains and around Mont Blanc. In fact, I'm going to put a picture up for you here. This particular day was very, very challenging. I can't point it out in the picture, but we went kind of around down this ravine between these two mountains and to the tiny little town that you can kind of see maybe on the picture, and then up over another pass to the Italian border. It was a very, very challenging day. But my point is that we discovered the importance of a couple things. One, the importance of good walking sticks, hiking sticks. But also we discovered the importance of good footwear. When we were walking, training on the nicely manicured paths of Eldred King, we had no idea the rocky, hilly, and long distances that we would be traveling, right? And good footwear makes a massive difference when you're on a long hike. And Paul draws on this imagery in Ephesians 6:15, when he says, "For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news, so that you will be fully prepared." As soon as Paul talked about shoes in the context of military and battle kind of thing, his readers would have immediately thought of the Roman soldiers' footwear, the caligae. Roman soldiers were famous for their footwear. And in fact, this footwear gave them a strategic advantage. I'm going to put another picture up here for you. Notice the thick soles on the shoes. The sandals gave good strength for stepping on rocks or whatever. Notice the little metal studs gave them good traction. Notice the sturdy leather structure of the shoes, and also notice the good ventilation in the shoes minimized kind of foot problems that would help that would arise. So listen, here's the point. It's well documented that the good footwear of Roman soldiers, the caligae, gave them a strategic advantage because they could march further and faster than their enemies, and that gave them, in days when they had to march, from place to place, from battle to battle, and that gave them a very clear strategic advantage. Park that thought about strategic advantage, because I'm going to come back to it again in just a moment. Okay, so Paul, drawing on this imagery of Roman soldiers' footwear, caligae, again, he says in Ephesians 6:15 in the NIV, he says, "With your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace." Or God's Word translation says, "Put on your shoes, put on your caligae, so that you'll be ready to spread the good news that gives peace." Be ready to spread the good news that gives peace. Or the New Living Translation says, "For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news, so that you will be fully prepared." Okay, I want to ask a question here about this verse. What is Paul saying in these words? As I read different translations kind of emphasize different things. The NIV kind of emphasizes this word readiness. It's like put on shoes of readiness. NIV. Let me back up here. With your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Feet fitted with readiness. But the New Living Translation, it's like, here, I got to find it in my notes. For shoes, put on peace that comes from the good news, so you be fully prepared. So are they shoes of readiness, or are they shoes of peace, right? And there maybe there's a dual meaning here for Paul, because certainly, let's talk about the peace that we receive, first of all, when we become a follower of Jesus. When we become a follower of Jesus, there's a huge benefit to us in that we receive the peace of God. Now, the word that Paul used here for peace is the word eirene. And we've talked about this word before, eirene. It's the same word, it's the counterpart of the Hebrew word shalom. Eirene, shalom can be used interchangeably. And eirene is... it's a very holistic peace, right? It's physical well-being, it's inner peace, tranquility, calmness, contentment, it's social harmony, friendship, love, unity, and it's spiritual peace with God. It's very holistic. It's, of course, peace with our Maker. It's peace with the people around us. It's inner peace within ourselves, and it's physical peace. It's physical well-being. It's an entire holistic well-being, right? So Paul says, put on shoes of peace. Put on shoes of eirene. Put on shoes of shalom. Put on shoes of well-being, right? So there certainly is an element of when we become a follower of Jesus that we receive this shalom, we receive this well-being in every area of our lives, or at least that's what we work towards. But Paul is not, that's not what Paul is talking about here. Paul is actually saying to spread this message of peace. So it's not necessarily the peace we receive that Paul's talking about, it's the peace that we give. And in this way, I think the NIV kind of captures it better when the NIV talks about shoes of readiness, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Actually, what Paul is doing here, he's echoing the words of Jesus. When Jesus said in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Blessed are the peacemakers. Or the New Living Translation, God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called children of God. Do you catch what Jesus is saying? If you're a child of God, then you're going to work for peace, right? You're going to work for shalom. You're going to work towards eirene. And this is exactly what Paul is talking about here. Again, New Living Translations, Ephesians 6. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news, so that why? So that you will be fully prepared. Again, the God's Word translation says, put on your shoes so that you are ready to spread the good news that gives peace. The idea here that Paul is suggesting is that this issue of peace, shalom, is tied to our mission of spreading the good news about Jesus. That statement right there is kind of the central statement of this whole thing, that the idea of spreading peace and shalom is tied to the mission of spreading the good news about Jesus. And remember I said, park that thought about strategic advantage. Again, Paul is talking about shoes. And in the context of military, his readers would have immediately thought of Roman shoes, Roman military shoes, and the strategic advantage that they would have had in wearing those shoes. And so is Paul suggesting here that there is actually, it's actually a good idea. There's strategic advantage to tying the message of peace and shalom with the message of Jesus, the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ? Is there strategic advantage to tying those two messages together? Because they go hand in hand. Like in Paul's mind, I don't think there is any separation that if you have received the good news of Jesus, if you have received his shalom, then you're naturally going to embrace the mission to share the good news and to share the shalom of Jesus. So friends, what I'm saying is, when we talk about the mission of spreading the good news of Jesus, we often think about spiritual shalom so that people can have a relationship, spiritual harmony with God, right? And certainly that is part of shalom. But there's also a part of shalom that is community wellness, social harmony, friendship, love, unity. And there's also a part of shalom that's inner peace, tranquility, calmness, contentment, and physical well-being, right? Shalom is that entire package. And so when we advance the message of Jesus in our community, we're advancing the shalom, we're advancing the well-being of our community, right? So let me finish by saying this. There certainly is an element where we individually, personally, advance the well-being of our neighbors, Kevin and, Dominic and I, like we advance the well-being of our neighbors. Excuse me. There is certainly a personal element to this of advancing the message of Jesus, but there's also a corporate element to this that we as a community of faith, we as Reunion Stouffville, how are we advancing the shalom of our community by advancing the message of Jesus Christ? So let me finish by talking about this. Second time I said that in last couple seconds. Finish by talking about this. So we have told you maybe a few weeks ago that we're getting very close. We can see the finish line of the government approval for moving boundaries at Heisey Hill and therefore being able to sell Heisey Hill. And so therefore we're moving closer to being able to acquire a facility of our own in Stouffville. And I've been talking recently with our Laura, our board chair, and with some other people about putting first things first when we think about our new facility, right? And the first question that we're addressing is, how do we want to use this facility? Or in other words, how can we use this facility to benefit people in our community? Because we don't want our new facility, if it's a downtown or wherever it is, if it's a storefront type space, multi-purpose, multi-use kind of space, but we don't want the space to be only used on Sunday. We want it to be used 7 days a week. And we don't want it to be used only by us in our small little group. We want our space to be used by the community. We want it to truly be a community center that benefits the community. And so we begin with the question of, what are the needs in our community, and how can we structure our new space to meet those needs? And in fact, Laura and I are meeting with Mayor Lovett in 2 weeks, or maybe it's next week or something, and we're also meeting with another counselor, Sue Sherban, and we're asking this question of the mayor and counselors and other people. What do you think are the needs in our community, and how can we shape our new space to serve those needs? So friends, do you see where I'm going with this? Paul says that in advancing the message of Jesus Christ, in advancing the good news, the peace, the shalom of Jesus, we ask the question, how can we serve? How can we advance the message of Jesus, the good news of Jesus? How can we advance the shalom, the well-being of Jesus in our community? So when we gather around tables for discussion on Sunday, I think the first question that I have for you is, what do you see the needs of our community being? And then, the second question of how can we advance, how can we help with those needs through our community of faith? Okay, so my time is up. Gotta go. Thank you so much for connecting with me. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday if we can. And just hope that you have a great day. Okay, God bless you, friends.